one of the key building blocks of the cloud that enables the cloud to be what it is called virtualization. And the best way to understand virtualization is first we're going to look at what a server looks like when we don't use virtualization. So in this example, we have a server. And as you know, the server has processor, it has RAM, it has hard drive, and it has network interface card componentry in it. Now, on top of the server, you install an operating system. Could be Windows, could be Linux, could be some other flavor of operating system. And then on top of that, you would install your application. So we've got the hardware, we've got the operating system, and then we have the application sitting on top. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, it does have a few limitations. So firstly, the operating system is tied to the hardware, and that means it's not portable. You can't easily move that operating system and the application that's installed on it to another piece of hardware if you have some kind of issue or you want to upgrade, for instance. So it's tied to the hardware. The hardware resources may also be underutilized, and this is something which really drove adoption of virtualization. I've seen many companies where they have a lot of servers running applications that are really sitting at maybe 3 or 5% utilization. That means all of that hardware that they've paid often millions of dollars for is sitting there unused. And that's usually because they estimated with a bit of caution. They said, well, I think my application needs a certain amount of resource, but I don't want it to run out of resource, so I'm going to estimate a bit on the high side. And often, for most of the time, the resources aren't using that available capacity. So let's now look at what virtualization is and how it can help to solve some of these issues. So with a virtualization stack, we have the server. We then have something called a hypervisor on top. So this is an extra layer that's been introduced. The hypervisor creates a layer of abstraction. Now what that means is it's able to actually present virtualized hardware to a operating system. In this case, we call this a virtual machine. So everything in this blue box is a virtual machine. We have some hardware, but of course the hardware is not in the virtual machine. The hardware is in the server, but the hypervisor is presenting an allocation of resources. So maybe the server's got 255 gigabytes of RAM, but you just give 6 gigabytes or 8 gigabytes to this virtual machine. You give it a certain amount of CPU power. You give it a certain amount of disk space and a certain amount of allocation of shared networking. So there's no physical hardware here, it's virtualized, presented by the hypervisor. But the operating system doesn't really know that. It just sees hardware, and so you can install an operating system and a website. Now, the virtual hardware is presented to the operating system essentially as hardware. That's what it sees. We call this a virtual machine, or you can also call it a virtual server. It just means that it's virtualized on top of the hypervisor. Now, the great thing about this is you can then run multiple virtual machines on the same physical hardware. So now you've not just got one instance of Windows or Linux, you've got multiple instances. And you can have many virtual machines on top of just a single physical hardware device. And I've seen instances where you might have 40 or 50 or even more virtual machines running on one physical server. And that can really help with using the capacity, so making sure that you're actually using the capacity that's available to you. Another benefit of virtualization is portability. So any one of those individual virtual machines can quite easily be moved across to another underlying physical server because it's virtual. So for example, if you just stop a virtual machine and then start it again, it can start up on a different host. So it can be on a different physical platform. And that's fantastic. What if your server has a fault and goes down? Well, you can quite easily boot your virtual machine on another server very quickly, which means that you don't suffer from the fact that your hardware failed. Or if you want to perform some updates on the operating system or the hardware of your server, again, you can just move your virtual machine somewhere else, do your updates, and then move your virtual machines back again. So that's a really key advantage. So virtualization has been around in several forms across many years. And in more recent years, we're looking at VMware as being one of the major virtualization software providers. So they provide the hypervisor and some management software for it. And also Microsoft have the Hyper-V technology as well.